Well, hello everyone.
Hello.
How are you? All good? All hope all of you are good, happy, and full of energy wherever
Here
around
we
the
are
world
again.
you are. So yes, another session at Microsoft Zero to Hero. What's your feeling, Hamid? What do you think about this
Amazing.
session?
I feel perfect. I feel like I'm seeing the community, learners, speakers, like more than anyone else in the life, like more than colleagues, more than family. So I feel like we are always here and we are having session. I'm so excited about it. So launching
Yeah,
sessions, talking about technology, Microsoft AI, cloud services. I'm like, I'm wishing like for having sessions every day in a daily basis. It's really feeling great.
it's really interesting. It's amazing that we have this opportunity to share knowledge with people, together with them, being in the community. And
Right.
actually, I have one news that I would like to share with everyone. So it's really exciting, Hamid, because we just broke the records. So we passed 8,000 views on our YouTube channel. So it's really
That's
great.
amazing.
It's a lot, energy feedback that we got from learners, and it means yes, we are in a correct path, and we are sharing a lot of things with our amazing learners. So
Right.
today we are going to have another cool session with a very amazing expert that I really looking forward to learn from him as well. So, what do you think about this session, Hamid?
I'm so excited, and I see our speaker is also in the backstage. So I'm
Yes,
excited that we quickly go through our slides and kick off the session and
exactly,
hand over
exactly.
the stage.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so as usual, we have some several slides, and then we will bring on our expert Jerry Nixon on a stage, and it's really amazing. So if you haven't joined us yet, aka.ms/join zero to hero, it's our short link to be able to join to Microsoft Learn community, Microsoft Zero to Hero. And just so you know, we are around 7,000 members together. So there is still a lot of places for more learners. So join us, share with us, learn with us, and it's really great to have you in this big, amazing community. So, Hamid, talk about Microsoft Learn, the best, amazing part.
Yeah, so excited. As usual, as we always mention in every session, make it your homepage. So this is exactly the place, the richest content that you can find ever about Microsoft. The cloud technologies, AI technologies, especially with Microsoft in the market as the lead for AI services. That's so important that you start learning about. There is also a short link about it. Learn Microsoft AI, aka.ms/ learn Microsoft AI, and also a hashtag. If you search for it, you will get thousands of resources, and so exciting. So you can build your own customized learning path with Microsoft Learn. You can do exam practice tests before you go to the actual exam, and that's so really a great feature to benefit from Microsoft Learn. That there are hundreds of thousands of modules and services that you can use within Microsoft Learn to take your AI and cloud knowledge to the next level. And together with Microsoft Learn communities, like Microsoft Zero to Hero and other learning room communities. This is exactly the opportunity that you can join communities, join to Microsoft official events and community sessions, just to learn experiences from professionals, MVPs, RDs, Microsoft employees. Like today, we have Jerry, and I'm so excited, and I'm sure we're going to learn something really exciting.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really great. So yeah, so we have like 2 3 minutes until end of our slides, so Jerry can be prepared for his slides and his plan. But before we kick off the, actually hand over the stage to Jerry, we just wanted to mention, okay, today we have Jerry, and also we still have 5 more sessions until end of this month. So make sure that you registered for those sessions as well. So those sessions are amazing, as the session that we have today, and we are continuing to have this consistency of the sessions. And I believe we are the one of those communities that never stop having live sessions together with our learners. So make sure that you have registered for the session, and I'm looking forward to see you all on those live sessions as well. But it's not the end of that. As usual, 15 of the months, and we released our next month's calendar. So July 2024, we have more amazing expert speakers. So make sure, actually, we are going to release the links to be able to register, but stay tuned. Make sure that you register for those sessions as well. And I think this calendar is amazing as well too. So what do you think about this calendar, Hamid?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like any other session, any other professional speakers from all over the world, I'm so excited also about July and also other my calendar months. So with August and with September, our calendars are ready. I'm so excited to that next month and 15. So we will be sharing also the upcoming month's calendar, and yeah, that's super.
Yeah, we have. I believe we have very good time plan plus having very good experts on and kind of line up. So it's great. It's great. And the last slides. So as usual, code of conduct in Microsoft community, in Microsoft Zero to Hero community, we expect you to be aware of the others, be friendly and patient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, be kind and considerate to others. This is the end of the code of conduct, but I have one point left. Don't forget to ask your questions from Jerry, because at the end of the session, as we have always, Jerry is going to choose the best question, and the best question will be our winner, who is going to get 50% off, let's say discount for Microsoft fundamental and advanced exams. So get ready for that kind of question and answers,
Yeah.
right? So that's all. Let's bring him on a stage.
Yeah.
Hello, Jerry.
Hi, Jerry.
You're muted, man. Let me see. I think yes.
How about now? How's it sound?
Yeah, we can hear
Hello,
you.
it's amazing.
Hey guys,
Amazing.
all right. Let's hope that's the last problem we'll have.
Yes, yes. How are you? How is doing?
It's beautiful. Today's a good day. I live in Colorado, and so the weather today is just spectacular. It's cool and mild and pretty, and it's been a great day.
Great.
Amazing, amazing. And I think it's a great day for sharing and learning, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. Let me,
Amazing.
thank you for having me come on. I'm going to talk about specifically Data API Builder. It's one of the coolest things that, honestly, I've ever had an opportunity to talk about. And I think you guys will, when you start seeing all the details about it, you'll see why people fall in love with it the way they do. And I'll go into some of the nitty gritty about it and kind of explain why people are really, really seeing it and kind of diving into it. It's changing a lot of the ways that architectures are being designed. It's not the first time something like this has been dreamed up, but it's one of the first times it's really been brought all the way, made it, and still open source free. And I'll talk about it here in just a second. But just to tell you about me, so I work on the SQL Server team. I'm a PM specifically with the SQL Developer Experiences team. That's a special team inside SQL that is focused on features, tooling, and all of the things that will make developers' lives just a little bit easier. And so if you look at the history of SQL Server, it has been focused on the DBA, making it so that, high availability, performance, all of these things that are super important to make it so that the database is awesome. But sometimes when you pay attention to all of those things, you forget the usability side for the developers. And so my team is kind of paying attention to the developer, paying attention to the developer community. And so I started at Microsoft almost 15 years ago. I've been a developer evangelist for almost 10 years now at Microsoft. And so it's a pleasure to me to interact with the community. It's a pleasure to me to kind of hear stories back from different developers and engineers, to watch people's careers, kind of the whole arc go as they start adopting different technologies and learning different things. So your advocacy of MS Learn, and you already know, but behind the scenes at MS Learn, there is so much effort and so much attention being placed into making it so that it is one of the best resources available. And it's really great when we get criticism back from MS Learn. We get criticism that is at a level that is so far beyond where other documentation is, because other documentation, they're like, we just wish we had documentation. Well, we don't. That's not what MS Learn is. We could tweak this and tweak that, because it really has been there. So much love and attention has been given to it for the last probably about 7 years, that it has really transformed to be one of the hallmarks, really, of the Microsoft developer experience, but also kind of the thought leader on the internet as well. Just with all the videos and tutorials and quick starts and best practices, and of course all the reference material as well. So thank you guys for being the kind of the leaders in the advocacy for MS Learn. It's one of the best tools.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's really great to hear this kind of feedback from experts like you. And we are so happy that you have you in Microsoft Zero to Hero stage today. And for people that you are live right now, just you know, you can ask your questions directly from the original source of the data. So make sure that you have your questions. And then do you have anything to add, Hamid?
No, I'm just excited to dive into the session. Thank you.
Amazing.
And good luck.
Yeah, good luck. The stage is yours, and we will enjoy.
All right, thank you guys. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that is really worth pointing out is that public preview tag has been removed. And so this is one of the best things that has happened. 3 years ago, a bright idea was born, and it was we understood that there were developers who loved interacting with Azure databases. So Azure databases include SQL Server, SQL on-prem, SQL in the cloud. It also includes Postgres, Cosmos DB, and MySQL. All of those we consider the Azure database family, and as well as like SQL Data Warehouse. I don't want to leave that out. And the thing was, about 3 years ago, we realized developers were using this like crazy. And when I say crazy, I mean in a given hour, we have telemetry of logins, and the number of logins is in the hundreds of billions. And it is an amazing thing to witness, and it is a lot of telemetry to go through, I don't mind saying as well. But that's the popularity of it. But we also saw that a lot of developers in our community were struggling to interact with it and struggling to just access it, right? Because they were at a point in their career. Not everybody is a 40-year veteran, right? And so they were at a point in their career where they're just learning React, they're just learning XAML, they're just learning the UI frameworks they need, or they're just learning C#, they're just learning the patterns. And there's so many things that they don't know. And interacting with the database was just one more friction to getting a good application in place. And they would be attracted then to the easiest possible path, right? Just like water that flows in a river always goes the easiest path. And so about that time, we realized that there was a portion of the developer community that really wasn't being served well. And so we turned our attention to them. Data API Builder is just one of many things that was the result of that kind of awakening. And part of it was a lot of tooling that was changed. A lot of, like, when you look at the SQL Server developer tools inside Visual Studio, a lot of that really began to be invested in at that time. The DAC pack and the way that it works and publishes from Visual Studio, as well as the extension inside Visual Studio Code to be able to work with a declarative data model. And then finally, a lot of the features inside SQL that had been pushed off. So because it was so DBA focused, there were many things. An example might be being able to call out the external REST points from a stored procedure. That was never even on the table when DBAs were the focus. But once developers were the focus, we realized there were a lot of use cases that were unmet and that needed to be reached. And this is just one of the many tools we added, as well as like things like regex, binary JSON, and stuff like that, that really make it so that SQL Server remains just the candy that developers enjoy. That's the whole idea. So along with that family, of course, is Data API Builder. And the reason for Data API Builder is to make it so that we can take an ordinary multi-tier application and take an entire tier and remove it. That's the idea. So if you're building an application today, let me just kind of show you what I mean. If you're building an application today, you will have a client talking to a database, And in between that client and database, you will add some sort of an API. And that API is there for a lot of reasons. The API allows you to scale horizontally. That means to say that I can have many, many clients talking to my database, but in order to make it so that I can scale horizontally, because databases scale vertically, they go up and down, they just get bigger boxes. It's harder to shard them across. Certainly it can be done, but it's technically more complicated. So instead, I put an API in front of it so that I can have multiple API points. All of those can be load balanced and lots of options that developers get that they wouldn't have gotten if they go directly to the database. I can also now handle exotic types of security. And I can more likely, you're going to manage things that are principal claims that come from a JOT token. And that sort of thing is just built in and easy to manage inside an API. I can also transform some of the data as it's going in and out, as well as add policies that make it so that I can have an overall domain security rather than data security on the database side, right? So there's all kinds of great reasons. Another great reason would be caching. I can cache now on the API side, make the API work a little bit harder, make the database work a little bit less. And so now all of a sudden I have options because I've introduced that API. Data API Builder didn't invent the data API. No, developers did. Best practices that started to see all the things that made us want that. And all of a sudden we have it. Now here's the problem. From project to project to project, as you start building another API, the truth of the matter is you kind of go back and copy and paste from your previous projects. The work that you did before was already good. You had already built all the repositories. You had already built all the contexts for Entity Framework. You had already built all the models, all the things that you need, including the unit tests, including the CI/CD pipelines. There's a lot just to have an API layer. In fact, when you look at the overall scope, it's significantly more than a third of your code base. And so we realized two things. One, it is incredibly repetitive. And it is also costly because you only have so much time as a developer to be able to build out the tools that you need. And so you have to make decisions, and they're architectural, and they are kind of like corner cutting compromises that you say, okay, I've only got a month to build this. What can I build in a month? I've only got 2 months to build this. What can I build in 2 months? And depending on the scope and scale of your API, you have to make compromises. And we started to realize that you didn't have to make a compromise if it was all built up front, and we provided it as an engine that did the work for you. Another thing is there's a drive now in the industry. Of course, we all know REST. Remember SOAP? We all loved SOAP, and then SOAP was replaced by REST. And REST was replaced by SOAP, or REST replaced SOAP partly because it was so easy to use, it was so straightforward, and the JavaScript was so easy to manipulate. Now, we start to see there are limitations to REST, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But one of the biggest things was we need to replace it with something, and Facebook invented GraphQL, and developers realized quickly that GraphQL was very appealing in certain use cases. Now, those use cases aren't every use case, but it's a lot of them. So we start thinking, should we build our API as REST APIs, or should we build our API as GraphQL APIs? We build them as REST APIs. They're nice and easy. We build our controller inside a web API, inside a .NET Core application, right? ASP.NET Core. Or we go over and we build a GraphQL implementation where it's still an ASP.NET Core, but we start using other libraries. We start building what are called resolvers to make it so that the GraphQL syntax works. And it's a lot of work. And so we went from an API that was already a little expensive where we had to make compromises to an API that was even more expensive. And so this is where Data API Builder comes in. We're saying, let's just have everything. Let's give you all of the features that you want so we can have a feature-rich API layer. Let's give you all the REST endpoints that you want with extra capabilities around the edges that we learned from OData. Let's give you GraphQL all the way through with nested queries and nested mutations. Let's give you all of the security that you expect to have. And let's also enable all of the stateless container opportunities, right? So the opportunity to scale horizontally, and to scale vertically if you want to, just at your API layer. And on it goes. So think about this. You're about to build an application and your team is like, okay, we need a client, we need a database. Obviously, we want an API in the middle. Instead of saying, how many months and how many man hours are we going to dedicate to this repetitive task that is not really anything special, but instead it's something that I just have to do over and over again and is error prone? What if I just took that out and I said a third of our code base is going to be solved by a free open source engine that is no compromise and probably gives us more than we would have been able to afford otherwise? That's Data API Builder. So the nice thing about Data API Builder is that it is only a replacement for the API. It doesn't change your database or change your client. I mean, your client still interacts with your API through JSON, right? It's just an HTTP endpoint. Everything stays the same. We don't tell you to change, install a specific framework. We don't say you have to pick a certain language, a certain technology, a certain operating system. It's just an endpoint like you would expect. And then the backend database, right now we support 5 databases, and we expect for that to grow. So that means that we try to meet most developers kind of where they are, what it is that they are already doing. We just kind of fall into place so that you can use it. All you need to provide to the Data API Builder is a JSON file that we'll talk about in just a second. That file basically says, this is my database. These are the tables that I want to expose. Believe it or not, that is it. It's not low code. It is zero code. It's not a code generator. It is a container. It's an engine that runs in a container. And remember, it's open source. So you can go to our open source repository. You can look at the code yourself and start to realize that it is nothing proprietary or exotic. This is the type of API you would have built if you had all the time in the world. So I have an engineering team that we cordoned off from SQL Server. And for the last 3 years, we have been building Data API Builder. We have been building it to best practices. We have been building it to the standards that you would have expected. We have been building it in the open with managing issues in our roadmap with the rest of our community. So you can imagine Data API Builder represents some of the best code that you would have in your overall solution. That's the idea. And again, I just want to go back. This is open source. This is free. I'm not selling you a product. I'm just talking about a new way of thinking when you start architecting and laying out a solution that is data-driven, right? Of course, you're going to have an API. Why build it? That's what we're talking about. All right. So I know it sounds pretty amazing, but it is. And it was really geared towards developers themselves. So let me just point this out. We have everything that you would expect and want, right? So of course it has Open API. So Open API is our ability to expose all of the intricacies of our REST endpoints so that you can either build documentation or expose it to your clients and customers so that they can interact with the API with confidence. All right, that's great. So that's there and ready to go, and it just works. You don't have to turn it on. We just give it to you. And then we also have Swagger is built in. So we have a developer or a development and a production environment. It's a mode that it switches in and out of. And when it's in the developer mode, you have all kinds of capabilities, both Swagger and we have Banana Cake Pops. So Swagger is the UI for developers to be able to test and interact with the REST endpoints. Banana Cake Pop is the UI for developers to be able to test and interact with their GraphQL endpoints, right? So we want to give you all of that. We also have a cross-platform CLI that you can use so that you can do everything locally as well. So we've done a lot to try and make it so that the friction to adopt DAB is as low as possible, and we're not done. So last month, that was May, is that right? Yes. May 15th, we went GA. So that's the reason I said earlier that the public preview can be removed, right? Now, all of a sudden, we've gone to a place where we're paying specific attention to our backwards compatibility policy, our breaking change policy. And in a lot of enterprises and developer teams, they're not allowed to have things that are in preview in their own production. So now we've gone into general availability, both to follow all of these policies, to kind of lock it down so that we can have our first real version, and to enable a lot of developer teams to be able to adopt a DAB as well, the Data API Builder. Okay, so a couple of little things I just want to talk about, and it is that more than likely, if you have an API, you will interact or introduce an API manager. The API manager allows you to do the load balancing and the versioning of your API and a lot of the things around security that you might be asking yourself, well, how do I get all these things done? You could say, I want all of this done inside the API layer, but that's not right. It's not right. The API layer, if you think about the separation of concerns, is not really responsible for those types of things. It's not the thing that should be doing the load balancing. It's not the thing that should be handling all of your like exotic security. We'll go back to, right? The truth is it needs to support it, but not run it. We need that somewhere else. And that's the reason we typically put a load balancer or an API manager or an app gateway in front of your data APIs. So think about that. There's a lot out there. If you're running in the cloud, for example, if you're running in Azure, you can use Azure API Manager. It's just a service that we have that does exactly what I'm talking about. Or if you're on-prem, there's a lot of other options that you can choose as well. Many of them are open source and very, very popular. And the only reason I bring that up is when we're really thinking about the architecture of an overall solution, we're talking about not just an API point, but we're also talking about what are we going to do in the next version? Like how do we look at the future of the application that we're building? And an API manager is a natural piece that makes it so that moving forward is easier and easier, because it's so easy with a greenfield application to do what we want to do and not think about the maintenance developer or the next team that comes and builds version 2. Please at least investigate an API manager to think about that. But there's more. API managers also allow you to extend it. So today, when you look at the CRUD operations exposed, and they're very rich, but they're not everything. If you look at the CRUD operations that are exposed through Data API Builder today, there's going to be that 1% that you need to do. And that 1% is easy to add a custom function or endpoint or an Azure function or Lambda that does this little bit for you without having to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the whole idea is, if you have replaced a third of your application with Data API Builder, and all of a sudden you have this one requirement that makes it seem like Data API Builder is not going to do it for you, you build a custom function to meet that need. And now I can basically make that custom function look as if it's a natural part of my API because I'm using an API manager. Okay, so, and you wouldn't throw out API, because all of a sudden now you have to build a third of your solution that you had already put away. Right? That's the idea. All right, but that's not all. Another thing you can do with Data API Builder today is you can make it so that if you want to scale to multiple databases at the same time, and maybe you want to break things apart. So maybe you're breaking them apart by domain because you're domain driven. Maybe you're breaking them apart because these are microservices that end up feeding back to your site or your application that you're writing. No big deal. These are small stateless containers that make it so that you can build these APIs instantly, right? And so this is nice. If you think about this from an architectural and a project planning point of view, you draw something like this on a whiteboard, and now you're like, okay, each one of these is going to take this amount of time. But that's not the way it works with Data API Builder. Each one of these is going to need a configuration file, and then you're ready, right? You just deploy it. And so that's the nice thing to think about. You can suddenly enable a microservices, or at least several services, really easily and separate them and not feel like you need to rebuild and redeploy an entire new solution over again. So that's nice from a scaling point of view. It's also nice just from like a sharding point of view. So one of the things we might do is our data itself is broken apart inside the database. Maybe we've hidden that data. Maybe that database is actually a fleet database that has multiple behind it. But let's just say that I want to have multiple endpoints responsible for different things inside my application. One of them might be a read only, just for reporting. Another one might be a read and write, but only to my inventory schema. Another one might be for sales. Another one might be for HR. And I put everything in my nice, huge database that's already nice and well segmented. And I make sure that those segments don't get all blurred together inside my API layer. No problem. I can separate it just like this. And this allows me to also be able to see my provisioning broken apart as well, where I can say 1, 2, 3, 4 different APIs, each one provisioned slightly differently. One is a little bit bigger than the other. Another one is, let's say, billed to a specific department, and on it goes, right? So it's nice to have these sorts of options. However, you can also do the opposite. It's not really the opposite, but it's kind of the opposite. I can have Data API Builder provide an API for me, but it points to multiple databases at the same time. And it allows you to have all of these disparate databases in your enterprise, but show them as if they are a unified endpoint in one place. That could be analytical and operational data together at one place. It could be two different app systems together in one place. It could also be on-prem, and it could be in the cloud data presented at the same time in a single query through a single API. And even cooler is, I could even have one API that pulls from relational data and NoSQL data at the same time in a single query. Depending on what your client needs, you have all this flexibility to be able to build out to what it is you want. All right, I know I'm showing you a lot of slides, but let me just talk about a couple of other easy things. Another thing that we provide is first-level cache. Second-level cache is in our short-term backlog. We'll be bringing that in soon. First-level cache basically is in-memory cache, and let me tell you what it does. I can take a single query that has high concurrency. So this is where a lot of pages, a lot of users, or a lot of whatever are calling to the same API for the same data over and over again. An example of this might be an expensive query that causes everybody to wait, or another even simpler example might just be lookup data that doesn't change over time. It really is a slowly changing dimension that you are able to access. I can add to that. Well, let's just say, so I have some numbers that show if I hit this with 200 concurrent users at the same time, I'll get around 150 queries per second. And that, as nice as that, 150 queries overall in 20 seconds. Sorry about that. That's because that concurrency causes locks and it causes query delays. However, with a single second, that's just one, a single second of in-memory cache, I can transform that from 120, let's just say it's 200 queries in a 20-second period to more than 16,000. And I can make the overall average experience down to the millisecond. And the reason I can do that is because I know that this data is not stale. In fact, 1 second isn't stale at all. That could just be normal system latency. But if I add a single second of cache, I can transform my API from being a pretty good API into an unbelievably scalable API without increasing memory, without changing and adding two stateless that I load balance across, just by a single second of memory. Now, we support milliseconds. You could go into hours if you want to as well. But it's just something to think about, that having this at your disposal, not something you have to build and then see if you like it, but something that's right there for you just to test and try out, can transform your API, but it's there kind of as a feature for free for you to be able to use. So, and just knowing it's there, please don't avoid the fact that we have this incredible cache. And just as one last thing, so we interact directly with static web apps inside Azure. We also interact with Azure Container Apps. We also interact or work well with Azure Container Instances, Azure Kubernetes services, your on-prem Kubernetes services, Docker, of course, all the things that you like. We already are enabled to support it as far as where it can be hosted. More importantly, we run on-prem and in any cloud, not just Azure. I know I've been talking about that a lot, but this really is an open source project that is cloud friendly to almost everything. But we also have great things for Azure, of course, right? Because we're SQL Server. And one of them is Easy Auth. That's a feature of Azure Static Web Apps that is very straightforward to be able to configure authentication, including like a Microsoft account, a Google account, and it's really, really a beautiful system. But of course, we also handle Entra ID. Entra ID is Azure Active Directory rebranded. It's now called Microsoft Entra. And so we support that and all of the claims that come from it, as well as your own custom JOT token that you might have. And you would hope, and if you are building an enterprise system, you want to make sure that this is observable and you have a single pane of glass that allows you to be able to see your entire application. And of course, we are fully instrumented, and we have all the telemetry that you're going to need to be able to measure the temperature of your API, to decide if everything is going the way that you want it to be. And we natively interact with application insights as a sync. We have console sync, of course, and several others that are on our backlog as well. So the whole idea is we want observability so that you can have best practices inside your application. And then just as a reminder, this isn't a choice. It's not saying, do you want REST or do you want Graph? You can have Graph and REST at the exact same time. In fact, you can change this to be some tables are graph, some tables are REST, and you can interact with those the way you want, or you can make everything both, right? It's kind of up to you depending on how you're building your application. All right, that's a lot of words and a couple of slides, but I just want to make sure that all of this is clear, that it's a replacement of everything you're doing in your data API today. And for a lot of our customers, they've talked to me about this, of course, right? Because I'm the PM for Data API Builder. So I get to talk to a lot of customers about this. And they are, they say things like this: we have development teams, but they don't really know all that much about building a sophisticated API. Data API Builder lets them do that. We have development teams, they could build a sophisticated API, but they're busy with other things. And that's the common scenario, right? It's not that we can't do it. It's just there are only so many hours in the day. All right, so let me make sure there's nothing. This is the one thing that I think is worth at least pointing out before I jump into my demo, and it's that to find out about DAB, it's easy enough. It's akams/DAB. That's where that takes you directly to our repository, and that's our that's where you can add issues. You can read through some of the roadmap that we have in our discussions and start to take part. It at the top of, in fact, let me show you real quick. At the top of aka.ms/dab here, takes you right to our repository. And at the top of the page, up top of the README, it gives you the opportunity to join the community. So this takes you to a form where you just tell me your name and how I can contact you. And that allows you to be informed whenever we have our monthly stand-up. So we have community stand-ups on YouTube every month where we talk about the last set of features and the version, and talk about some of the key issues that are being talked about in the repository or on the discussions part of the repository. You get to meet some of the engineers along the way and see some of the customers that are using it, right? So this is how you would just join that to be part of it, as well as to take part in the roadmap discussions that we have and to be able to figure out what belongs on our backlog. Let's take a look and see what Data API Builder looks like. So I hope you join the team here. Here we are. And let me just start by saying I have a notebook open. So it works like a run book, of course, so I can go through this demo and make it really simple. What I want to show you though is how in just a couple of lines you can have a working API. So 2 command lines. I have the CLI installed, and I'll explain that here in just a second. This is the high-level architecture of DAB itself. So right in the middle, this is all of the guts of Data API Builder. The configuration file is given to us, and at runtime, when I spin up my container, I talk to the database, confirm that everything in the configuration file is true, all of the tables and columns that you specified, and then I expose an endpoint just like that. And so that's where over here I expose either a REST endpoint or a graph endpoint. And if you are using a NoSQL database, it's exactly the same, except for I need a schema for your documents that you'll be pointing to, right? So I know that NoSQL makes it sound like there's no schema, but of course you have a schema, right? It's not the Wild West crazy in your NoSQL database. You have to make sense of it. And so you start identifying the documents that you care about in your NoSQL database, and you point them to us. Right? That's the overall piece, and everything happens automatically. We build the schemas for you. We build all the Open API export for you, all the endpoints, and secure them for you. Right? So it's really, really great. All right, so I have a simple database. It looks a little bit like this. The reason it's laid out in this way is because it just shows all the different types of relationships and fields that I want to expose through DAB, right? I want to keep it simple. We won't expose everything in this demo, but I want to show at least some of it. So in this case, it's an actor, and an actor plays a character. There's a many-to-one relationship to there. And then the character is in one or more series, and then that character is one or more species. That's because this is a Star Trek database. So I'm keeping track of all the actors that play characters in Star Trek shows, right? That's because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. All right, so the way I use it, the way I look at this is the best way to give secrets to anything is to have your secrets not in that thing, right? And so this is best practices moving forward. And part of what happens is I'll take my secrets and I'll put them in something like Key Vault. And Key Vault will say, you can't have this secret unless you have exactly all the credentials in place. And so that's beautiful. And the way it works in a container is, as that container gets deployed, Key Vault gets invoked, and then it gets added into an environment variable. That environment variable then is available to your application. Nothing new about environment variables. Just want to point out that when it comes to deploying an API, you want to use them. And of course, DAB supports them. If you're a JavaScript developer, then you probably are, or at least a Node developer, you're probably already familiar with env files. .NET developers probably aren't, right? They're used to using Visual Studio and setting environment variables inside the IDE. But nonetheless, we support env files no matter what the languages you're using. And those env files, and this is just an example, you don't have to look at it too close, but it just has name value pair of my connection string. So in this case, I'm showing that I have the connection string, and it might be too small for you to read, but that's okay, because you know what a connection string is. It just has the connection string name, an equal sign, and then what my connection string is. Then it has my app insights connection string. This doesn't work. I don't have this enabled. I just want to show you how you would provide more variables to it. Now, when you deploy this in your own container, you wouldn't use an env file. You would inject into the actual things. But at design time, when you're developing the application, we give you the env file to make things easy, which, by the way, env files inject environment variables in the process scope of your computer, which means it doesn't clash with other environment variables you might have, and other applications aren't able to read it. So it's a very secure way to do it. I can put all of my secrets here while I'm developing, and I can make sure that my env file never gets committed into my Git repository. So it's just a beautiful best practice. All right. So now just know that I have an env file. I'll show you that this is what my env file looks like raw. I actually have one. And let's move on past that, because I want to show you how we get started. There's only 2 commands I want to demo to you so that you can see how it works. I guess there's 3 commands because start will be the 3rd one. Let me just begin by saying, all right, it looks like this. I'm going to say dab init. Let me go ahead and make this bigger because this is worth seeing. This says, and I'll hide this for a moment. I'll just make it even bigger so it's nice and easy. So this is dab init. Dab is our driver. So that's the name of our CLI, DAB. That's the command you would use. And init is the verb. So that is what we're invoking inside our driver. So dab init, and we pass 3 things to it just to get started. The first thing we pass is the type of database. Remember, it's MySQL, Postgres, Cosmos, SQL Server, or Azure SQL DB, or SQL Data Warehouse. Now, this points to the environment variable. That's because as I'm creating my configuration file, the thing I'm going to put into source control, I don't want to have my secrets there. So instead, I point to where I'm going to hide my secrets, and that's inside an environment variable. And just scrolling back up, I'll just say the name of my connection string right here is my-connection-string. And then, so I'm just saying it's my-connection-string. In fact, we've built DAB so that inside the connection string, you could have every property an environment variable if you wanted it to be. I can't imagine why you would want to, but we support it. It's great. Okay, the last is I want to set this to be the host mode of development. That just means I want all the features enabled so I can interact with it. By default, this would go to production and it would lock it down. So it's secure by default the way you would want it to be. Okay, so here's the actual command. And I'll just point out that in this folder that I'm in, there is no configuration file yet. So I'm going to create it from scratch here. And I could run this, but I'm going to open up the terminal and run it with you. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll just open up the terminal here, clear the screen so it looks nice and easy. And let me paste in what's going on. So I have one extra piece. I want to make sure my configuration file has a name that I expect, and that is dab-config.json. The reality is that's the default. I don't even need that, but I have it there just because I want everything to be explicit. And then, like we said, it's a Microsoft SQL database that I have running locally with my Star Trek database. And then here's my connection string, and then finally the host mode. This null I'll take away. This is just so it doesn't have output when I'm running it as a script in my run book. All right, so now I'm ready to go. Okay, everything is done for me. Now, the reason we have a CLI in the first place is because interacting with JSON, as easy as it is actually very error prone. To get that closing curly brace, to get the correct comma wherever it is, especially when you get to hundreds or even thousands of lines, then all of a sudden a missing comma is nothing but a nightmare. But interacting with the CLI is always nice and fast and makes everything perfectly formatted for you. And so you can see over here, I have a 3rd file now, and that 3rd file, let me close my terminal and show you that that 3rd file has, let me pull this over, and 3 sections inside this JSON file. Again, standard JSON. We have a schema set up. It's on the repository. You can see for yourself, and it is fully documented in exhaustive detail in Microsoft Learn. In fact, if you wanted to see it, and let me just do that for you so you can see what it looks like just real quick. That's aka.ms/dab/docs, right? And so I'll say go, takes you to, I forgot the dot. There we go, the /docs. That'll take you to our documentation site. Here's our documentation site where you can go through all of our quick starts for every database type you want, or if quick start into Azure if you want to go. We go through all the different concepts if some of these things are new to you, to make sure that you understand everything. And then right here in the reference section, we have our command line, of course, fully documented, and every single section in every single node inside that we support inside the configuration file. This is we've worked so hard to make this super approachable and easy for you. So hopefully it feels like that when you start looking for something inside our documentation. So akms/dab/docs is how I got there. All right, so now I have this. So I've set up my data source. You can see all the settings were what I put in. Here's the data type, the connection string, and this ability to pass all of my claims information that comes through my JOT, my JSON web token, and pass that all the way through to my SQL Server if I want to have let's say a very sophisticated store procedure that reads my claims and does something on the database side. I can also do all of that on the DAB side. I don't have to do that in SQL Server, but it gives me the option. So by default, it's set to false, so I don't pass that through, but I could, right? And then all of a sudden it's there. And different enterprises have different requirements, and so we want to support everything we can. Then we have the runtime. This is what REST is going to be set up like, right? This is how we're going to project our REST endpoints /API. That's pretty standard, right? And it's enabled. So I could turn it off here globally, or I could do it at each table. And then, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, this strict part. GraphQL, this is how GraphQL is exposed, extremely standard as well, /GraphQL. There's only one endpoint for GraphQL rather than one for each table, one for each entity. There's only one. So instead you create a graph query. Very cool stuff. And then finally, all the pieces around authentication and security. So right now I have it basically turned off, except for here I have mode development. That's because I want everything. What I want to draw your attention to, though, is entities and the fact that it's empty. So these are all the tables. So let's start by adding some entities. So let me go back to my run book here, and let me add an entity. And this is the command I'm going to use. So remember, it's an actor table. And so that's the only one I'm going to add here at first. And I'm going to use dab, that's our driver, and I'm going to use a verb add. And that's to add an entity. So I will add actor, and that's not the name of the table. That is the alias I'm using to identify the entity. That means that I can have, if the table name was crazy, I could still have a very easy to understand alias here inside my configuration. And then I will give it some default permissions. Those are the only two things you have to give it when you get started. So I have the command here. Let me open up my configuration again, or my terminal again, and show you that I can go dab, so that's my driver, add is my verb, I'm adding actor. Whoa, now this is the source. I'm saying I want it to be dbo.actor. That's the name of my table using two-part naming that SQL has. All right, so let me do one quick thing. Here we go, and all right, sorry about that. Just want to make sure everything's ready. All right, so I'm gonna hit enter, and when I do, the only thing that's really happening now is it is adding it to that configuration file for me, right? It's just making sure that the syntax is correctly done correctly. Let's see, except for, there we go. Sorry, I had to do it twice because I hit a couple of Control-T. All right, so you can see that the configuration wasn't provided, so it is using the default name. I told you earlier I was already using the default name. And I have added now one new entity named actor with the source of DBO actor. Now let me pull that up and show you the change to the configuration file. Where entities was originally empty, you can see now there's something here. There's a lot to this, right? And this is the reason we have the CLI, to make sure that this still feels easy to do and interact with, and you can still have the richness of the full JSON configuration at the same time. But let me just walk through the main concepts just so it feels familiar to you. First of all, this is the name we gave it, and this is the source. So we're saying that the object name is DBO actor, and it defaulted to table. That's why I didn't have to say that. However, we support tables, views, stored procedures, right? All three, whatever it is that makes sense to you. And so if you're like, oh, I'm always going to abstract my tables to views, that's cool. We totally allow that. I only use stored procedures because of performance tweaking. Okay, we support that too. So it's kind of up to you how you want things to be. And so when this is exposed as GraphQL, it has its own configuration. So it is going to be called actor, and then we use, just like you would if you were building your own, we use humanizer to figure out the plural. We also set up REST, and we'll get a load of this. I'll say that the path is /actor. Let's make it, plural is fun. So now API/API/actors will get this table for us, right? It's really, really nice. And then finally, here are those default permissions. Here's what I want to say about permissions. This is a CRUD service. It is create, read, update, delete. Every single one of those can be individually set, not just for the table, but for every column. You can change it for each one. You can have different roles that you're passing in. It doesn't have to be anonymous. It can be authenticated. It could be administrator. It could be whatever makes sense to you. And then we take all of that and we apply the specific rules that you set up right here. That means that you can have very sophisticated security, or you can allow your API manager to have the security, or you can set up all of the security on your database. The reason we allow all three is because different enterprises have different rules, and we want to allow each of those to be there. Now, when it comes to doing it inside Data API Builder, one of the other things we have is that you can add policies. Let me see if I can show you the policy. Well, it doesn't matter. You can add policy. We call them database policies, and it allows you to say things like only when the claim, a specific type of claim, has a certain value. Only when the claim matches a column value, right? Or a column value has a certain value. And so I can make it so that I have a lot of sophistication right here to make sure that this is acting almost like row level security at times, to make sure I'm exposing to you all the items for you, and I'm exposing to me all the items for me, and it's not hard coded. I can have a generalized rule right here in the configuration. Now you can kind of see why the configuration file could get so long and why the CLI is so appealing, right? Very appealing. All right. That's the second command that we ran. The first one was dab init to initialize the file. The second one was dab add to add actor to it, right here. The third and last one will just be dab start. Dab start will read my configuration file, connect to the database, validate my configuration file, dynamically create my endpoints, both REST and Graph, and then launch the endpoints and host it inside. We use Kestrel, just like you probably would. And so now it's ready to go. And you can see everything is set up. It took me way longer to explain that than it did for it to run. We count on dab being a sub-second in its start time because of the way we want ephemeral containers to be supported. We want it so that your container can be serverless, right? And it can go to sleep. Somebody makes a request, and all of a sudden it turns right back on, and we don't wait forever for it to finally spin up. We have to make dab super fast, and so we have. We want to be able to support all these different scenarios. So let me go ahead and show you what it looks like. I'm going to go into the SSL endpoint, opened up in another browser here, or another window. And so by default, it just tells you the basic information that it's running, it's healthy, the configuration is right, here's the version that you're running, and the app name that will be submitted in, as far as telemetry. All right, so now I can say slash, right? So now I can say slash API slash open API. Wait, I think, is that right? Yeah, it is. All right, so here, this is built for you automatically, right? This is everything you need. There's a lot. And you're like, wow, with only one endpoint? And you're like, yeah, there's a lot to it to make sure it is fully documented. And now there are a lot of open source tools that can point to an open API spec and create documentation that you can give to a customer, give to a client developer, or whatever it is that's consuming your API. It's really, really great. It's also a terrific way to interact with your API when you forget where things are. The other thing I can do, well, let me just show you ACTORS, right? I think that's what we called it. So that's the quick and easy way. I can go straight to the API and get everything back that I would want. And I can add neat things, right? So I could say I only want the name. So I could say $select equals, it looks like it's uppercase name, right? So now I can start to project my data by selecting only the columns that matter to me and really winnowing it down the way that I want. And I could say, I could add filters as well. So another thing I could do is I could say and $filter equals, and I could say, well, because I've selected only name, let me take that part away so I could have a couple of things to filter on. Let me add one. All right. Where ID equals 1. All right, there we go. For now, that's fine, right? Just William Shatner. But think of what that allows you to do. It allows you to take an entire data set and collapse it down to only the payload that you care about, and then to project the fields down to only the payload you care about. So one of the problems with REST is that there are so many options, right? And so many fields that are being returned, so the payloads are giant. So we fix that just by adding these types of query string filters that you can add to it. Right? It's really, really great. By the way, if you don't do this, we paginate automatically. So that's probably the best. So look at this. I could say first one, let's just say, right? That'll bring back the first one. It's paging now by 1. If I don't put first, it'll default to 50. And look, it gives me the next link to go and get the next set of operations, right? So that's what I would want. All my records to be paged the way I want. Can you imagine building this yourself? Of course you could do it because you're a smart developer. Well, why? All of these capabilities are just given to you literally for free. All right, so let me just show you this. We have Swagger, but you don't have to put the API. We have Swagger, so you can interact with these. You can add all the headers that you need. You can pre-authenticate, so the bearer tokens are part of it. All the things that you might need to really test the full production API. Not that this would run in production. This is for developers, but so you can run a full scoped API, I guess is what I really mean, right? So neat stuff there. And now let me just show you just real quickly how we also have GraphQL. Here we go. Right? And so GraphQL, let me close this, allows me to write a query that looks like this. Let me zoom in just a little so it's bigger for you, right? So I create a query. That's just the syntax that you have, and you pass this as part of the body. And then you say what you want. So actors, just as a reminder, I'm going to go back to the configuration file, and I'm going to show you that right here, this is the actor. We're saying plural. I want more than one actor, or I could select just one. That's where it comes from. And so now, when I go to, there we go, I'm saying actors, so more than one, and I'm going to select items. That means columns or fields, depending on the type of database that you're using, and what the columns I want. So there was one other birth year, right? So you see that autocomplete that I had got there? It looks like IntelliSense inside Visual Studio. That all comes because we've built a full schema that is exposed through, and graph tools know how to read that properly. So it's really nice. And when I run this, here it is, I ran it. And this has the same capabilities. I can project all the columns the way I want. I can filter this down to only the ones that I want. I can also have pagination the way that I want it to be. So the benefits that I was just talking about, the capabilities we added to REST are also here in Graph, but Graph has one more thing that's amazing. And that thing that's amazing is that I can then nest things as well. So actors, I could also then go to the character, and it's a single payload, and I'm doing these joins automatically behind the scenes. We take your graph query, write the SQL, and create the joins for you so that you get the data that you expect, right? It's really, really great. And it's all dynamic. It's all well done. But listen to this. Some people are like, I wouldn't allow any tool to write queries for me. All right, fine. You don't have to. Just do it inside a stored procedure, and then you can access it the same way, right? So there's all of these answers for these problems, and it doesn't mean we have to throw everything out. We still get all these benefits that we would want in a nice, robust API. All right, so there we are. Now, this is Banana Cake Pop, by the way. It's built in. It's just like Swagger. And it gives me all kinds of neat capabilities to be able to test it and to be able to see, here's my, let me show you the schema, how the schema kind of shows up. So I can query all the actors, or I can do actor by PK, right, by the ID. And then I have different mutations, and we haven't talked about this. This is a CRUD API, not a read API. So I can create, I can update, I can delete. But when I say update, I can both put and patch, right? So I can update the entire block or individual portions of a record, and we write the query to support the different things like that so you can be more efficient. Now, REST versus GraphQL. One more thing I want to say before we move on. Graph can do multiple things at one time in a single query. That is amazing. In fact, when it does multiple things at one time inside of a query, it does it inside a single transaction. REST can't do that. REST cannot do that. And so one of the reasons people love Graph is because they can insert both the invoice record and the invoice line item record at the same time, all inside a single transaction, and know that if one of them fails, the entire thing rolls back. In REST, you would call it multiple times, right? You would say insert this and then insert this. If one of them failed, you would have to figure out a way to roll the other one back, right? So it's really nice to be able to have that capability. It's one of the appealing things to use Graph. If you're a .NET developer on the client side, it's called Strawberry Shake. That's the most common library you would use to interact with the GraphQL. As far as REST, you already do that, right? You just use whatever you use and like. That I don't want to change that. All right, that is Data API Builder. If I were to go back in and say just run this entire book, and let me do that because it's built to run. And so if I'll just say run all, right, it'll delete the configuration file and then rebuild it from scratch. And it'll add things like relationships. And the reason I want to just point out the relationships to you is when you have tables that relate to each other inside SQL, we can expose those. If you have two relationships, we only expose one if you want. We could expose both or none. But more importantly, if you have two tables that are not related and you as a developer do not have access to the schema of that database to change it, that's very important. And the reason we want to be able to have aliases to tables, the reason we want to be able to map columns to new names, and the reason we want to be able to do this is because you don't always have control of your database. And so if you have two tables that don't have a relationship, in DAB, you can define a relationship, sort of inventing the relationship, and we'll expose it as if it's real. We won't look to see if that constraint already exists in the database. We'll trust you, and we'll roll with it from there. The data types have to match, and all the things have to be right, but we can do it. So it gives you a lot of capabilities to make your database look way more awesome than it is, as well as caching and things like that. So they're really neat things that you'll be able to kind of introduce to your API layer that you haven't been able to before, thanks to DAB. Thanks to, I mean, it's open source and free. It's scalable and secure. It's all the things that you want. And now you're able to take this gigantic part of your code base and throw it away. Simplify your CI/CD pipeline. Remove hundreds, if not thousands, of unit tests that you have against repositories that are really just copy and pasted from another project that you did before, or just written by Copilot because they're so simple to do. So my recommendation is at least look at that, right? Just look at what you get with it and look at what it saves you. You can have a POC of an entire database exposed through a data API by the end of the day, maybe by the end of the hour, if it's straightforward and simple. And so that's valuable. Let me reopen the configuration and just say, like, so here's I wanted to show you one of the relationships. So this relationship is on the actors table, right? So it's the same. So this is where the graph was, this is where the rest was, this is where the permission, and then just right below it, this is where all the relationship information is. So nice and easy, right? I can say this is cardinality of many to many, one to many, many to one, whatever makes sense to you. And then those point to the tables that you want. We build those relationships and expose it the way you want it to be exposed. And we added here, and now it is enabled and it is cached. Right? So it's that easy. So I could just say, I don't want it to be cached. All right, now it won't be cached. And so all of these things are just meant to make it so that you can make your API as awesome as possible, as easy as possible, removing the friction to be able to interact with the database from your application layer. So guys, I hope that makes sense. I hope when you're looking at this, you're like, oh my gosh, Data API Builder really meets the developer where they are. All right, I'm going to take a minute and kind of look at some of the questions that we have because there are quite a few. And let's just see. We get a lot of questions around. We get a lot of questions around performance. And here's one of the things I want you to know. Let's see. Fabric is a big deal. So inside the data world of Microsoft, the topic of the day is absolutely Microsoft Fabric, and Microsoft Fabric exposes endpoints. Guess what technology they are using to expose their endpoints? That's right, it's DAB. So when we start thinking about performance, we are always thinking about performance because Fabric is gigantic. The amount of data that is possible to be consumed and sent, the types of queries that are going to be written, we're always thinking about scale and performance over and over again. The great thing is that doesn't add to complexity, it just adds to capability. So you have all this extra capability built into DAB that you don't even see, and that we have spent the engineering money to make sure that it's there. All right, so that's one of the questions I want to make sure. All right, quick question here. I can't show them on the screen, but Mehrdad, I see yours. Do we have to create a separate DAB per destination? Now, I think by destination you must mean database. Can this be dynamic? Can this be dynamic to choose the database when the structure is similar? So 2 questions there, so 2 answers. The first one, do we have to have a separate DAB per destination? You do not. You can have one DAB that points to many destinations, or if destination means database. And or the opposite, you can have one for each, and that's no big deal either because they're just small little containers. But the second question you asked is, can this be dynamic? And it cannot be dynamic because the connection string that you are giving me is static, right? We are reading that connection string from the environment, right? That's where we're getting it from. So it can't be dynamic. I kind of understand I would love to know your use case, to be honest, because we've talked about a couple of things in DAB, like as far as putting it on our backlog as we move into the future. One of them is supporting fleet databases. So this is when you have sharded a database out and you want to be able to use a tenant ID to be able to select the correct database. And we've also talked about actual sharding. So there's a couple of things that we've talked about, but to be honest, these are not short-term goals of ours. These are just things we've discussed as possibilities. So I'd really like to know your use case. Go to the repository and join the community, man. It sounds like you're really interested in it. That's a great way to connect with me. You can also just email me, jerry.nixon@microsoft.com. That's a great way to maybe do both. All right. Let's see. Boy, you asked a lot of questions, man. All right, let's see. There's a GraphQL for Microsoft Fabric to read the. Yep, that's DAB. All right. Let's see. I don't see any support for DAB for Fabric data sources. Well, that's not totally true. SQL is a DAB is a Fabric data source. So is the SQL Data Warehouse. Both of those are data sources in Fabric. However, I kind of understand what you really mean, and that's true. We are not a replacement for the APIs that Fabric already exposes. And at least that's not our current plan. It could be, right? We're thinking about a lot of different potential data sources to add to DAB. Again, those are long-term backlog items, not short-term. Right now, we're going through a full security review. And so just think about that from an open source perspective. How often do you use an open source project and you're like, gosh, I hope this is good? But that's not the way we think about it. We can't put the code out until we do all of the reviews that are necessary. So right now we're in version 1.1. That was our GA version. And then 1.2 will be released, and that will be our security review, of course, we've gone through security reviews, now we're going through a lot more. So it's just awesome to think about it, right? It's kind of like free software. That's what it's like. All right. All right. Last one from same guy here is pagination built-in feature to DAB. How will it manage the subarrays of a node? And the list, I suppose you mean the subarrays of a node in GraphQL. And so they follow the same pagination rules. So if you, let's say it's an invoice and line item number, or in line items, if you select an invoice, and just one, you filter it to a single invoice, and the line items, those line items will page. If you select an invoice and you don't filter it to just one, the invoices will page. And if you don't filter anything, then the invoices will page, and then the line items will page. Right? So it's complicated to get right, but we got it right. All right, Angelo. Let's see. I've been kicked out at 19:30 sharp. I had to rejoin. Okay, sorry that happened, man. That, you know what? Sometimes those things happen. Hamid, I see yours. Nope, sorry about that. Victor, how do we add authentication? All right, so hopefully I've already shown you how to add authentication. Well, I've shown you the basics of adding authentication. The truth of the matter is, I can't show you how to add authentication until I know the type of authentication that you have. If you have Intra ID and you've created an application identity for this already, then you can add that application identity into the runtime section under here we go, into the runtime section and set up authentication not as static web apps but as Intra ID, which is hilarious that it is still Azure AD for now. We just haven't created that synonym for it, but it's still Intra ID. And then you can go in and say the client ID and the URL and things along those lines as well. Okay, Pay, I see yours. Let's see. Saw this late and just joined. Is there anything I can read up on for the earlier part? Well, let me just tell you, there is so much information available with Data API Builder. One of the best, I think, is perhaps if you really just wanted to get started, you could look up Data API Builder 101 on YouTube. I think it's an easy way to get started. It's basically the demo that I went through here with you, but more detailed. Or you can go to the documentation. So we talked about how AKMS/dab is the URL to get to the repository. And if you just add /docs at the end of that, you can get to the MS Learn endpoints where we start and provide all of the quick starts and everything you want to know about Data API Builder. All right. I feel like I've talked a long time. I feel like I've tried my best here to answer all the questions that you have. And Murad, I see you keep sending in quick questions. Is there any built-in bearer token builder in DAB? Let me tell you why the answer is no. Because your API is not supposed to do that. It's not supposed, like a bearer token builder, they already exist, right? So why would we write them and put them inside an API engine? That makes no sense, right? And so a great question, but it's the answer to a lot of questions. More common questions that I get are things like, how do I version? Is there versioning built in? That's a good way to say it. Is there versioning built into DAB? No, because DAB is not a versioning engine. What is a versioning engine is an API manager, right? So is there, I mean, and you can kind of go on, are there other things that it does? No, there are many things that when you think about the proper separation of concerns inside your infrastructure, you wouldn't want that extra bloat inside the code base anyway. Right. And so we certainly don't. We want this to be lean and mean. We want this to be fast, secure, scalable, and performant. That's all we want. We want every feature you can imagine to be in there, but only the ones that belong with an API. And we want all the tooling that developers are looking for and expecting to be in there as well. So I appreciate 100% the question, but it's the answer to that question is the answer to many questions. And it's just that we want DAB to be DAB. And the truth is, we are thinking about building extra tooling that would be a companion to DAB, but definitely not built into DAB. Yeah, that's not our current plan. All right, thank you everybody for listening. Thanks for taking the time being interested in DAB. The truth of the matter is, it's as awesome as I'm making it sound. It's as fast as I'm making it sound, and it's as easy to implement as well. So, Amit, thank you for having me. I almost read yours as if it was a question.
That was an amazing session. I really loved it. Thank you so much for this great session. And I'm sure the audience and the people also watching live, they really enjoyed it. They can see in the comments. And looking forward to have you on the stage again. And I'm so excited. And we are actually planning for in-person sessions with the Microsoft Zero to Year community together with Microsoft Learn. So looking forward to it. So having you on stage, either in person or online. So excited for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me and having me here. There's so many features in SQL for developers. I'd love to come back.
That was really an interesting topic. I see also Said in the backstage. Are you joining, Said?
Yes.
Hey.
Hey again. It was really great. So yeah, thank you so much again, Jerry. It was really a pleasure to have you in this stage. And as Hamid mentioned, we would like to have you again here. And I think this is a very interesting topic that we always have a lot of things, around this topic that we can cover. And who is best than you, to have on a stage and enjoy it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
We already had our question and answers, and Jerry, since we promised to giving a 50% exam voucher to one of the best questions, so this is you going to choose the question. What do you think like about the question? So we're gonna choose one of them, and then we can share one exam voucher.
Well, certainly certainly if volume wins the day, I think also some of the best questions came from Mehrdad for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I know Mehrdad, so I'm gonna reach out to him, and yeah, congrats from now on for the exam voucher. Yeah, perfect. Looking forward. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Jerry for taking time. We really loved it. Looking for
See you
future
guys again.
sessions. Thank
Yeah,
you.
amazing.
See you. Have a great day.
Yeah. Don't miss our next session. See you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.